All right, we are live.
Yeah.
We have a big show tonight.
do.
I'm actually nervous. This is we've had one guest at a time. We get two big guests this
And
evening.
you have me.
And well, as usual, yes. So we don't want to keep them waiting for too long. So this is Ungovernable. I'm Matt. This is Jocelyn. As usual, like, comment, subscribe, share. Definitely help us out. Is not our intention to be monetized on YouTube. In fact, some of the things that we talk about this evening might get us kicked off of YouTube. So if you are following us on YouTube, also make sure that you check out our stream on either Vim TV or Odyssey on the blockchain. Because we won't be kicked off there, I promise. So with normal business at hand, we have to open up the bottle of wine, do our bougie business here. We got H3.
Can you see? It's like a wing.
It's like a wing,
I
and
can't
it's
show it.
H3. It's a red blend, and H3 stands for Horse Heaven Hills. And where is this from?
I like it.
Was this from Washington State? So
it's very pretty. There's blue on the other side.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of blue.
This is a highly analytical way for us to choose wine, by the way. So Jocelyn's going to do the duties on that one. So we are speaking this evening about this recent piece of propaganda that came out within the last couple of months. Bill Gates, How to Prevent the Next Pandemic. We're going to be talking through some of the issues in the book, but then also specifically kind of talking about the further implications of that. And so with that, I want to bring on two awesome guests, and we have some synchronicity on this one too. Yeah, just listen to the synchronicity. This is absolutely fantastic, right? Our one guest is, if you can see this, Jeffrey Tucker, who is the author of Liberty or Lockdown, absolutely fantastic book that I had the honor of doing a Blue Star Union book club on. And then also we have Clint Russell, who is the host of the Liberty Lockdown podcast. You see how those two things go together? It's absolutely totally unintended, people. So with that, I want to invite our two guests as we get a little bougie here. Bougie. We got Jeffrey Tucker and Clint on the show. How are you, gentlemen?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. And thanks for having me at that little bar that you had. I'm sorry I got you canceled by YouTube. That was unfortunate.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yes, we definitely got taken down for a little while on that one.
My apologies.
I'm doing great. Anytime I get the bat signal and I know Jeffrey Tucker's involved, I'm like, yes, sign me up.
Great. Thank you.
So let's kind of talk like high level and kind of like come down from there. This episode was really kind of inspired because Jeffrey, you had done almost kind of like just a baseline overview article on the book, I believe.
Yeah.
It was profiled by Del Bigtree on the High Wire, and that we're big fans of. What really kind of like is this a usual thing where you go out and kind of like review books and give kind of like a bullet pointed review, or was there a special reason why you kind of went through this one?
Well, yeah, I try to read all the opposition books. Just to get a sense of where they're going, how they're thinking, and whether they're dangerous, or how to answer their objections. I mean, the Brownstone Institute's all about. I mean, it's basically the opposite. Brownstone Institute, the opposite of Gates's book, right?
Yeah.
And I can name many other books in this category. So I feel like I want to take them. Well, I feel like I have to take them down. But more than that, I'm just obsessed with the topic. I just like I want to crawl into let's say you have the kind of mind and the power and the money to destroy the world, and you do it. All right. So why did you do that? And then why did you write a book about it? So I want to know. I want to know. And so Gates was a fascinating study and a very frustrating book in some ways, because he's so arrogant, and he's so sure of himself and his worldview that he just writes and blah, 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 blah. He never questions anything. He thinks the science is settled on his side. And he's just there in a sort of condescending way to explain to you why we need, a world government apparatus to protect us against germs, and he just never shuts up, and it goes on for an entire book like this, and it drives you crazy, really. I mean, I opened my review by saying, let's say you sat down at a bar, and a guy saddles up next to you, and he's buying drinks, and you're like, okay, that's good, but and then he begins to talk. You think, well, this guy's a little bit nutty, but he's buying the drink, so I'll put up with it. But after about 15 or 20 minutes, you're starting to think, there's something wrong with this guy. He's just a little bit peculiar. And then he keeps eliciting your agreement. You're like, you know what I mean? Do you know? And you're sort of like, well, yeah, sorry, I guess I sort of know what you mean, And and it goes on. And then, after about 25 minutes, you're like, well, gee, look at the time, I've got to get out of here. And you leave and you think, wow, I didn't realize that there's such crazy people in the world. That's really nuts. And then you wake up the next and you think, well, it's a diverse world. Lots of people have lots of views. And the next morning you look him up and you find out he's one of the most powerful people in the world and the richest man who's been driving pandemic policy for the last 10 years. So then you get spooked out. You're like, wow, the world's, being controlled by the wrong people, crazy people. And that's how I see Bill Gates. I mean, he's deeply, deeply in a frightening way, ignorant of cell biology and pathogens. And I mean, forget about human freedom and all those kind of, silly things.
Those pesky things. Yeah, they get in the way. Yeah.
He doesn't know or care anything about that stuff. So that's not even on his radar. But more than that, he's just unbearably stupid. And at least if this book is any indication. And I realized something really important about the guy, because I've become obsessed with, what he thinks and when he thought it and what his plans are. My theory is that he's dumb as a chicken, but he has a very big checkbook.
Yeah.
And so the world elites dote on him all the time. I mean, which would probably happen to you and you, Clint. I mean, like if you had several $1 billion in the bank, right? Everybody's your best friend. And you could say crazy things. Oh, the moon is made of Roquefort cheese and whatever. And everybody's like, well, good point. And so why are they saying these things to you? I mean, how come nobody ever contradicts you? Why are you the center of all attention? How come at every party you hold, everybody's doting on you and adoring towards you and telling you you're brilliant? It's because they want your money. And so that's Bill Gates. And he's very free with his checkbook. He's like, well, here's my checkbook for $2 million. And so on it goes. So I think that's essentially what we're dealing with here.
So let me kind of like poll the audience here. So for the three of you, I'll start with you, Clint. I've had this conversation with a lot of people, and I think it's very person dependent. Do you think that Bill Gates is the kind of person who understands the power that he wields and does it in this sinister, like evil way? Or do you think Bill Gates is the kind of guy that is this, what I would classify sociopathic or psychological or psychotic do-gooder, right? Like the person that thinks they know better and that they're doing great things and saving so many people in doing it, and that they deserve the fame and the money that comes with it because they're doing such amazing things.
Yeah, I personally think that he suffers kind of narcissistic delusion, but I think he's also very privy to the power he wields, and I don't think he's mistaken in believing that he wields such power. So it's kind of both, it's like it's exactly what Jeffrey was describing, where he gets his ass kissed wherever he goes. He's never told he's wrong. He's got almost unlimited resources. I mean, that's just a recipe for disaster. You have a guy who's not as smart as he thinks he is, but gets treated as if he's the smartest, most benevolent man on the planet. And it's like, well, after so many decades of being treated that way, I think they start to drink their own Kool-Aid and they start to really truly believe it.
Yeah, I think that's right.
What do you think?
Sorry, go ahead.
We have this conversation.
We have this conversation all the time.
I think he is an evil man. So I think he's evil. The millions of children he's killed, he has to know. I just think he's evil. There's nothing to it. I don't even want to blame it on a mental illness. He's like, he may be stupid though. That evil and stupid together is fine.
That is a dangerous conversation. Yes. Evil, stupid, and powerful. Yes. What are your thoughts, Jeffrey?
Well, so as you enter into these upper echelons of society, like higher and higher, you get in ever more exclusive clubs, and like part of the payout for being rich. Okay, let's say you have now $100 million. Okay, so now you enter into the $100 million category, and you get to hang around other 100 millionaires. And so you're flying private. You don't fly commercial. You don't eat at commercial restaurants. It's like the worst. Like you and I go to, I don't know, whatever kind of noodle shop around the corner. Like Bill Gates never does it. So, but none of the people in this category ever do this. They don't meet anybody who's normal. And they're very careful about the cocktail parties they go to. Now, if you get $500 million, you leave in the dust all the 100 millionaires and you go to the 500 millionaires. If you get $1 billion, you'd say, screw you to the 500 millionaires, and you'll hang around billionaires. And so on, it goes up and up and up. And at these parties, at these events, at these restaurants, you test everybody to find out whether they have this kind of money, whether they have this kind of means. Like, how did you get invited to this? Well, I founded a tech company and sold it. Well, which one? And so on it goes, right? Yeah. And so they ever more insulate themselves from the socializing opportunities that comes from mixing with a variety of different people. They simply
it's just like separating them from just the average people that they affect on this, daily way.
Yeah.
Just more and more.
And also these people gradually come to believe, and which is wrong, that their riches are a kind of a sign and seal or a codification of their brilliance. So they all go together. So they only want to hang around with other highly accomplished, highly intelligent people. And gradually these people, and actually it's a presumption in this world. And I've been entered into very low levels of this highly structured society, right? But they believe that they should be in charge. I mean, that's just a presumption. They do not believe in human freedom and human rights like we would describe those terms, that they apply to everybody equally, that everybody should have an opportunity. It's that maybe they'll invoke those slogans. They don't actually believe them. They believe that the world should be run by themselves and the people they know. And if you live in that world long enough, it's impossible to escape it.
Well, that's like the divine right of kings. Right, like the idea that you're basically, whether you believe in God or not, right? You're touched by some higher power or authority, or your birthright, basically, to lead, and that's your bank statement, and other things that show your station in life are basically your license to be that leader, right? The person that deserves to be at the forefront.
This is exactly why these people are the vanguard of our modern technocracy. Is because and just a little bit of my background, because I managed hundreds of millions of dollars in investor funds, I interacted with some people that were no billionaires, but the 10, 20, 50, maybe even 100 million type of asset holding folks. And I'll tell you, it is exactly, it's a linear progression in terms of like your delusions of grandeur. You start to really believe, depending on your bottom line, like better than everyone. And the weird thing is like oftentimes I did identify, especially if they were self-made, I could identify a correlating IQ increase, where they were smarter than the average person. Like there's no doubt about that. But simultaneously, that doesn't make you smart enough to control the world. It's like there's this leap that they make, that the billionaires make, where they go, not only am I smarter than the average person, which is irrefutably true in my experience, but I am also smart enough to manipulate all 7 billion people on this planet into my own image. That is where you get really dangerous stuff. And that's
this is really funny too. I'll sorry to cut you off, Jeffrey, but so like I was just kind of like looking through like the first page of notes that I have right from the very beginning of the book, and two thoughts come to mind. First of which was Bill Gates is the technocrat that Uncle Ted Kaczynski warned us about, right? Like he is the guy that Uncle Ted sat in that shed thinking about, right? Like, and probably printing out postage for, right? the second element is
Hell, he could have been writing about him.
no, at the time, totally.
Yeah,
Right?
he's been powerful
did
that long.
coincide. The other point of it is like right on page 16, like he has all these little things that he includes in the book to be like, those kind of like, how like every so often Phil Murphy has those like photo ops where it's like, see, I'm an everyman. Like I understand how things are for the real world, right? In page 16, he actually acknowledges that some of the critics that were researchers that get grants from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he knew they wouldn't speak out against them for fear of reprisal. So he said that they had to intentionally go out there and get other researchers to give outside opinions that they weren't giving money to. And like, it's kind of damning in a way because I think he uses it as, see, we did a good thing. And you're like, really, the culture inside of the organization is so toxic that people are afraid that if they tell the truth, you're going to take their money away from them. Like, I don't think this is the win you're talking about, but it really kind of speaks to that, don't, bite the hand that feeds you and I'm your benevolent dictator kind of thing. So I'm sorry, Jeffrey, I cut you off.
Oh, not at all. I think you're right about this in a sense that, Bill Gates, for at least 15 years has bought the epidemiological profession. He's bought the journals. He's bought the universities. He's bought the World Health Organization. He's bought all the media outlets and that sort of thing. And his driving passion has been for the control of infectious disease, which I am convinced, and he doesn't discuss this in his book, although if you understand this following point I'm about to make, the rest of the book makes sense. So his great professional struggle in life was that he invented the Windows operating system, and it was destroyed by viruses.
Yeah.
And so between, say, 1995 and the day before yesterday, that's the top threat to Windows is viruses. And he believed that he had created a clean and beautiful operating system, and that all these external, factors, these actors had created malware that were constantly finding holes in his system, and he blamed them for it. Now, if you think about it this way, his operating system is clean, and there's the big bad world out there that's constantly invading, and so his job as a software engineer, as a CEO, is to come up with third-party solutions that block the viruses, that catch them before they infect the operating system. And that pretty much summarizes his 25 years of his life. So believing that he had great experience in doing this, he never understanding that the word virus in the world of computers is a metaphor, right? So he believed that he was the guy appointed, by God or whatever, to block malware from invading the human immune system.
Yeah.
And that's how he approaches literally everything. Like, one of the things you will not discover in this book is any kind of deference or understanding of evolution. That the human being evolved to coexist with pathogens. I mean, that's just not there. He acts like the human being was invented in 1995.
Yeah. He also simplifies the evolutionary track of viruses too. So nowhere in the book does he talk about. We talk about it all the time. If anyone's seen Geert Vanden Bossche, I always screw up his last name, Vanden Bossche, right? Talk about viral pressure and essentially mass vaccinating people during an active pandemic. He completely glosses over that point, as if we can just proceed as we did during this pandemic and everything's going to be rosy. I think what's also interesting is this is like the earliest victory lap. Like, have you ever seen the videos, like people running marathons and they lose like in the last, like 20 meters, someone like catches them from behind because they think they're like way ahead. He's writing this book in the end of 2021, right? There's still Delta circulating. Omicron is becoming the dominant variant. and he's writing from like this position of authority, like he
prevent the
thinks he's
next
got it nailed,
pandemic.
right? Like he knows that we got all the right answers this time, or at least we learned everything we could. We know what the next one's going to be, and
Wait,
we can get out ahead of it.
video of him coming out and saying that the vaccine didn't really work? Didn't we see a video?
No,
on
he even talks about it in the book, right? Go ahead, Jeff.
But this is not a failing to him, right? I mean, it's the same sense that McAfee software or whatever kind of virus checker, the first iteration is maybe not that good. It's kind of effective, but it's not great. And his job is to instruct them. Well, it was good against the following 50 pathogens, but there was a new one that was made. You need to come up with a new iteration of the software. That's the way he treats vaccines. So he doesn't have a problem saying, well, these vaccines were limited. They didn't stop the spread, and they're actually not very effective against infection. And they did stop some symptoms. The other problem is that we have to keep giving them. I mean, ideally, that's not.
He's working through it in his brain for the next time.
That's not the kind of. Ideally, we want a vaccine you just give one time, and then everything. So he acts like it's a software problem. Well, it's not a software problem. We're talking about a coronavirus, and I'm probably you guys are with me on this, but when I first heard that this was SARS-CoV-2 and it was a coronavirus, I thought, oh, well, there'll never be a vaccine against that.
Yeah. Yeah.
They had been trying.
And guess what? You were right.
And I on Twitter, I called it up. They want to invent a magic potion to get rid of the pathogen. That'll never happen. I said this, right? And I'm not, I'm an economist, not, a cell biologist or whatever, but I can read Cell Biology for Dummies. And I know about the history of coronaviruses that they have a lot of changes of clothes and a lot of mutations. They're always going to outsmart the vaccine. I mean, that's just always true. And so if I knew that, there's no question that like Pfizer knew this and so on. I'm not sure that Bill Gates knows this. I think he's maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's just a liar, but I think he's genuinely confused.
Well, I think
what do you think, Clint?
Another correlation or analysis point that has to be made is, he doesn't delineate between computer viruses and pathogenic viruses, but all computer viruses are man-made, and perhaps so is what we've been dealing with recently. So I think that's
Perhaps.
yes. I'm trying to keep you on YouTube, brother. So yeah, I think that's an interesting point to make, is that like perhaps he's treating these as if they're man-made because he knows they are. And
that is a fascinating point. And there you get back to the timeline question, because I heard Bill Gates in a recent interview say that he had learned about the pathogen from Wuhan in the first week of February. Okay. Now you have to check your timeline. There's no way that's true. Well, if it is true, he's not reading the newspapers, and if it is true, it's scarier than if you were lying, because I wrote an article about the subject for January 27th, and I had been thinking about it for at least a week. And I said, don't lock down. This is a disaster. I know what's coming, because I knew these lockdowns plans were in place for the past 15 years. But if he only heard about it in the first week of February, that means that he's not reading the newspapers. He's not getting phone calls from anybody. He wasn't in touch with the Wuhan lab. And probably the first call came from Jeremy Farrar and Fauci, and who told him at that time that they believed it was a lab leak, because they did believe it was a lab leak. I mean, Farrar says this in his book, that he and his friends were 80% sure by, say, January 30th that it was a lab leak. So if they got together, and we know for sure that they were on clandestine or secret Zoom meetings and that sort of thing on February 1st, and the February 4th article denying the lab leak was in first draft at that time. Among the co-authors, Peter Daszak, who got the money that Fauci had distributed from NIH to fund the gain-of-function research and the Wuhan lab. So they must have plotted, all right, guys, when are we going to tell Bill?
They don't tell him till they need his money, I guess.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's call Bill. Oh, he'll always take Anthony's calls, Tony's calls, and so let's say it's February 7th. Listen, we got a problem. We got a. It looks like this might have been a lab leak. We got a pathogen, as you predicted, Bill. Very astute, very insightful. Your prediction of 10 years is coming true now. Unfortunately, it's come out of. We think it might have come out of the lab that our good friends, our very good friends in Wuhan, they've been doing very, very good research, but lab leaks happen. There was one in Wisconsin in 2009, as you know. I mean, these things happen, but we're gonna have to deal with this in a big way. So if there's anything you can do to help, please step up. Now's the time.
Yeah. What's also interesting in the book, and we've talked about this a lot at length, he seems, I mean, he's a nerd, right? Like, so he's a nerd in like kind of like I don't even know if he's a nerd in like a hyper intelligent way. He's like a nerd in like a weird way, right? But he has this nerd focus on the speed of mRNA vaccines, right? And we kind of talked about this at length a little bit. This just like also, it might not have like started this way, but this entire situation just waxes of a way of streamlining and rapidly ramping up a response to bioweapons attacks, which, by the way, like it was technically, if the gain of function research theory is correct, it technically was a bioweapon, right? Mm-hmm. And so it just makes it seem like someone at DHS or within the intelligence organizations had to be involved at this at a high level at the very beginning, because the amount of money that they threw at this thing to ramp this up as quickly as they did just also makes it sound like, okay, this next generation of warfare is upon us, but how do we get the money in order to go from 0 to 100 miles an hour? And it just seems like they found the perfect reason to get a blank check from Washington, D.C. I mean, am I off on that one?
And you shouldn't forget also that we had tremendous tensions with China at the time. So 2 years prior, Trump had started the tariff war, and there was all kinds of talk about technological decoupling. And China's very dependent upon the U.S. trade in those days, less so now, and less to the extent they're selling us masks and things like that, right? But generally, Trump was trying to drive a wedge between U.S. and China, and so there was a motive there, And Farrar says this, that they were 80% sure it was a lab leak. The only question in their mind was whether it was accidental or deliberate.
Mm. Mm-hmm. What's your thought, Clint?
Man, I don't know. Do you want to get your YouTube channel nuked?
It would be a great honor to be the sacrificial lamb on this one.
I do personally believe that it was a bioweapon, and I think that the only logical explanation for the overreaction when it comes to the rollout of lockdowns is if you think it is a bioweapon, because if you ultimately, like, if it's an early stage one too, and you don't actually know how it's going to impact a massive population like the entire world, for instance, you might do some really dramatic things like locking people in their homes and welding them fucking shut. I think that's the best. That's like almost the least evil explanation for even thinking that lockdowns were a good idea.
Yeah.
So that's
what's interesting about it all is if you listen to a lot of like what Dell says on or like Garrett Vanden Bosch, right? And we were talking about the lockdowns in China, why are they locking down was it Beijing?
Yeah,
Beijing? No,
Beijing. I mean, basically China-wide.
Completely locking down again. And they were talking about how after the third or fourth boosters, right? Was it fourth boosters?
Yeah.
That people were getting coronavirus and it's going to come back and it's going to be more deadly and more virulent, right? Because
potentially, yeah.
If it does happen. And so they were like, we were thinking that maybe China was locking down because of the fact that this could get so big and quickly. And it's very deadly.
It's really strange because
of the vaccine.
Because China's basically nuked their economy. Right within the last 12 months, most countries have reopened because they're they were afraid of, pitchforks and torches in the streets, right? China went the exact opposite direction, which, funny enough, Bill Gates doesn't necessarily specifically reference China very often, but he definitely references some countries that came very close to China-esque lockdown.
Right.
He mentioned it at the beginning, right? Like he said at the beginning, they were very effective in their activities, right? But he talks about South Korea and the contact tracing and the cell phone apps and stuff. And then he laments that, those were things that wouldn't fly, right? Like in the United States, as if it's like ridiculous to want, your privacy of being able to.
Well, I think the point about him not recognizing the difference between computer viruses and these viruses, the biological ones, is that what's an interesting correlation there is that he also looks at pandemic response like a video game, like he doesn't consider the humanity of the people involved. He's just like, well, if we have a virus that's spreading, doesn't it make sense just to lock these sim characters in their home? It's like,
he's
no,
definitely
it doesn't
an
make
ends
sense.
justify the means kind of guy, right?
Yes,
like he's definitely that
has
guy.
to be.
Well, for sure. Yeah, human beings are just on a computer game. Clint, can I just go back very quickly? I was just dig in a little deeper into what you said, because I think it's a fascinating thing. You said that you think it's more or less like strong evidence that it was a bioweapon that they locked down, and I kind of agree with the second part in the sense that, and like you said, it's the least malicious explanation, right? It's that's it supposes there's a certain sincerity there that they think the lockdowns are going to stop the spread and maybe control the virus, and so I kind of have come around to agree with you on that point, that and you have to look back at 2003 2004 with SARS-CoV-1. The World Health Organization bragged that they had stopped the spread of that virus, which I think is probably wrong. So they might have believed that that's true. I would only add the following thing. Whether or not it was a lab leak, all that really matters to make sense of your explanation is that they believed it was. So they might have had this, as Farrar says, 80% fear that it was a lab leak. In that case, you've got Daszig and Fauci and Farrar all in a state of freak out. All right, we cannot allow this to become a global pandemic. How do we control it? Anybody have any ideas? Well, there's some computer scientists out there, who say that the key is to keep everybody at fault.
So is that because they think that it's a bioweapon, or just because if it is, they're culpable because they were actually involved?
So
in the
I think
funnel?
it's the second point, right?
Okay.
They think that they're culpable for this lab leak because no question Daszig funded the thing, and that involves American taxpayer dollars, and they think that if the normal process of representative government democracy continues as is, and this thing spreads all over the world, that they're going to be blamed for a global pandemic, and possibly, as Farrar says, starting World War III.
Wow.
So how do you deal with that? What is the answer there? And then lockdown follows from that. But all of that could be true, even if it came from wet market, whatever. Yeah, they believed it was a lab leak is enough to account for, in my view. I think you're right. I think it's enough to account for the global lockdowns, and they definitely got on the phone with Tedros from the World Health Organization, who 2 weeks after the February 4th paper was written, invited all of these academics from the UK and Europe and the US, including Fauci's top deputy assistant, Kurt Lane, whatever his name is, to Wuhan and Beijing and 3 other cities for a kind of Potemkin village tour to show how lockdowns work. And then on February 26th, the World Health Organization puts out this report. Wow, China's really got this thing going. They know how to control the virus. and that comes out with American authorship from a graduate of Stanford University who works at the World Health Organization on February 26th, and my friends in the epidemiological profession who know this stuff tell me that if it weren't for that report, the world would have never locked down. It was the WHO report of February 26th that caused it. And Fauci and Farrar from the Wellcome Trust in the UK, and Daszig, who had a very strong interest, who's by the way, whose op-ed appears in the New York Times on February 27th. Now, of all the people in the planet Earth, whose op-ed you could run on that day, why was Peter Daszig on the op-ed page of the New York Times? I mean, that's too incredible to believe. And the same day, the New York Times podcast had Michael Barbaro interviewing Donald J. McNeil, saying this has a 3 or 4% case fatality rate and 6 million people are going to die, and so on. That's the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, it was also the New York Times that funneled much of the BS about WMDs in Iraq War II. So I think that oftentimes they are used to seed, CIA information.
That's right.
So that's an interesting point. And I really think that what makes this so galling is that if they thought that it was their research that created this, and then they thought that they had to cover their ass, so then they pushed for these lockdowns. Right. It's just adding insult to injury. Like if you're actually being knows that human beings, like airborne respiratory viruses, are not going to be stopped by lockdowns, then you would just basically take your lumps and realize, like, look, we were working on this for this purpose, and it was an accident, and we're not going to lock you down because that would be insane. We'd break the economy. We would basically fray all of civilization with this plan that we have. But they don't. They still believe, and it kind of correlates to the omnipotence that they seem to have when it comes to creating these viruses in the first place, is that they believe that they are truly capable of anything. And that includes remedying a airborne, pathogen which they created. And I just honestly, like, I feel like if the truth of this is ever fully embraced by the people of Earth, you would see true, like, revolutionary stuff. Like,
I agree with you. I agree with you. When we have to we have to have investigations. I mean, these people all need to be put on the stand and questioned for weeks at a time. It's probably going to happen. So you're right. I mean, it's appalling. And even if Fauci admitted, all right, look, we were worried, because there's this 2-week period of we don't know what was going on between, say, February 1st and even 3 weeks, February 27th or 26th. We don't entirely know. We know for sure there's a delegation in Wuhan, but we don't have any emails from that period from Fauci. We don't have anything, and that was the period where the plot began. So did they meet with the New York Times? They surely must have.
Not to mention the fact that it's a common political tool or mechanism, right, to keep everything at arm's length, right? And so if you can go through a controlled third party to be the messenger or the heavy, right, like, to essentially using the World Health Organization the way that they did, I would actually argue that one of the reasons why they fought so hard to get Trump out of office was really kind of, he was pushing back against all of these kind of these controlled mechanisms globally that all of these other people were trying to buy into, because they knew that that was a way to do it so that, like, they could control the activities of Zambia without having to drop bombs, right? They could control it via health officials. I mean, you see it in the book, like, he talks about this germ force, right, that could be readily deployed or whatever. He basically wants to concentrate world health under 3,000 people. And that's it. An organization of 3,000 people that essentially transcends sovereignty, world governments, and things like that. And you already saw the first iteration of it, which, interestingly enough, the amendments
amendments.
to this
The
treaty
amendments
that
the
goes to
treaty.
the WHO come through the Biden administration, right?
Our
Right.
own. It was
But
our own people
it's-
that introduced the amendments.
But it's not the Biden administration saying that the US wants to impose this on other people. They're trying to use this proxy organization and essentially fund it so that they can, essentially be the curtain behind which the wizard operates, right? And most of these people are pinup people, right? Like they're completely just talking heads that essentially deliver the message. It would not surprise me that within those 2 weeks, they had to essentially concoct what played out over the next 2 years, because they essentially needed to be resolute and together in all of this. And what's funny is like he also talks about kind of the wishy-washiness of the messaging from the CDC and from the FDA that came out as far as masks and things like that. I think he sees that as like, Tony's my guy and he screwed me because he's on there talking about like, how you don't need masks and all this stuff. No, masks. We all gotta have masks, and like everyone knows this science. It's all settled and everything like that. But it definitely seems like that was kind of orchestrated during that window. I cut you off.
No, I was gonna say something to what you said, Clint, was like, well, if they made the mistake, then they just added insult to injury. And it made me think, I don't know if they know, but my parents died of COVID. They were murdered in the hospital. It wasn't COVID itself, but we talked to a lawyer afterwards, and we were talking about remdesivir. And I said, is there ever going to be a remdesivir trial? Because I want my mom, she had like 5 rounds in one day, which is basically, a death sentence. So, and he said, you'll never see it in the courts. They will never accept it in the courts. There'll be one day a recommendation that says, don't use this. And that'll be all that will happen. He's like, even if 1 million families came and said remdesivir killed their loved ones, the court would never see it. So even to me, even in, and the government, the people who create all this, they never admit what they do. They throw that shit under the rug. You have the PrEP Act. You have 12 iterations of it. In New Jersey, the only thing they can do right now is start a new bill for a medical bill of rights for medical.
So now we
they
have
can't
to
get rid of
counteract
the
the
PrEP
one
Act.
bill with another bill.
Yeah, so it's like there's no way for them to admit to anything. And I think it goes far beyond whether it started as a fucking as it let loose. There's been so many people that have been hurt afterwards, even, and it,
for sure,
continues to snowball. And this is where I say fucking Bill Gates is evil, because it continues and it continues, and they allow this. They just said remdesivir can be administered by needle to 7-pound babies.
Well, and
I mean, this is insane.
And they approved.
Continue it.
They just approved the jabs for what, under 5?
Yeah,
I think under 5 now too.
Yeah, I hope that permanently discredits these people forever, because it's just outrageous. I mean, there's no basis for this. Obviously, I don't have to tell you that at all. And any of the data that 5-year-olds should be getting the vax, and I think it was very interesting.
Remdesivir for 7-pound infants.
Yeah.
I mean,
if public opinion matters at all at this point, and it's not clear how public opinion can actually control this, I'm sorry to say, but you would have to have a population of complete fools at this point to believe any of the nonsense coming out from these.
Well,
people.
that's public education for you.
And they destroyed that too, right? I mean, they destroyed a whole generation of education, so that people can't think clearly, and they spend all their lives just staring at TikTok instead of learning about how to read.
I think your point about whether or not public opinion matters, I think that it also highlights like why they would want these supernatural national organizations to be like. They want to do away with the show of democracy, because like it still throws up hurdles in their best laid plans, because you have a guy like Trump that comes out of left field and they're like, oh shit, we got to like reassess everything that we've been planning for the next 4 years. And so why would you not want to give up your autonomy to the WHO or the UN or whatever, because they're unelected. So you can basically do away with this this conveyor belt or this revolving door of politicians that still have to pretend as if they represent the people. And now we can just go, we don't represent the people, we represent health, which is bigger than democracy. You know, it's
which
bigger
also
than democracy.
Which also it's insidious because you still control it because you control the purse, right? Like you control the flow of funds.
Of course.
And so they
can control it without
who pays their paycheck.
They can control it without being culpable for any of the negative consequences. Because if anything does go wrong, they can go, well, you know, the WHO blew it. You know, it's like, but in truth, all of the funding is coming from us, the taxpayer in the United States for the most part. And it's like or Bill Gates, I mean, he's also the funding source. So it's all very frustrating.
Well, that's like so I've never dealt with politics at a high level. My job was politics on a local and a state level.
New Jersey
level.
level.
A New Jersey level. They basically wrote the book for DC,
Correct.
right? And so typically when one of these things happens, you deny everything, right? That's the first step. Okay. The second step is you try and throw a Band-Aid on it, right? You'll throw out there some kind of peace offering in order for it to kind of hopefully die down. And sometimes you'll launch another story to try and, you know, deflect the news cycle away from what you're doing. And then if it all still ends up, you know, trying to stick itself to you, you essentially nail someone to a tree, right? And what's interesting is I'm not sure if we've seen anyone nailed to a tree yet on this, right? And so the question is,
other than the American people, yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean,
like the global poor really got nailed to a tree.
I'm not sure. I mean, like I do think that there have been certain people nailed to the tree, but not for reasons of lockdowns or COVID, right? They just there's certain they tag certain people as fall guys, and this happened to Donald J. McNeil at the New York Times. He was the first guy out to try to panic the American people about the coronavirus. That was March 27th in the podcast. And then March 28th, he had an article saying to take on COVID, we have to go medieval, you know? So he was a major, major propagandist for the stuff. And then, oh, wow, what a shock. A year later, he's fired because 6 years prior, he was on a student tour in Colombia or something like that and used an inappropriate racial epithet. You know,
no, and what's funny is like when I saw what happened with Cuomo, I was like, wow, it usually doesn't even take that much, right? Like we had an issue here where the mayor of Jersey City, right, which is he was the presumptive front runner for the governor of New Jersey before Phil Murphy boxed him out, and he had an issue where his campaign manager said like one thing back in college, like 10 years ago. And that's what essentially got him to be able to like kind of deflect this controversy that he was going through at the time and push it off onto his campaign manager. And obviously they put him in witness protection and then he goes and gets another job somewhere else, right? Like it's not like they're not gone. They just kind of go somewhere else and fill a different position somewhere else where their track record doesn't follow them, right?
I think that's how high level politics tends to work is that, well, first off, if you are going to be the fall guy, you always fall for something that doesn't highlight the truly nefarious nature of what's transpired.
100%.
So like Cuomo should have been put in prison for the rest of his life for putting COVID positive people into nursing homes, right? Mm-hmm. But instead it's because he grabbed a chick's ass or whatever, you know, like that's how they deal with it. But it's
people got pissed about that too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really care one way or the other. I just assume all politicians are doing stuff like that. But when they start to kill the elderly en masse, then I really want them to actually pay a real price. Right. But if you never have to highlight that, then the game goes on. And the real key is the people who never serve as the fall guy are those that know where the bodies are buried. And that's why Fauci and Gates and these other guys that are high up in the power structure, they'll never face the firing squad. Right.
They're still surviving. Whereas the people who stick their necks out, you know, first, like McNeil or the Cuomo brothers and so on, they get their heads cut off because it's a ruthless business. Yeah. And then we all celebrate. We're like, yeah, he's a bad guy. Good for him. But, you know, it was kind of bad that he said a bad word 6 years ago. That's really bad. And it's really bad that Cuomo, I don't know, sort of leered at a girl on an elevator or something like that. But it's even worse that they killed, they're responsible for millions of dead people, that's
Yeah,
but,
a lot
but,
worse.
but somehow that's not part of the conversation. So yeah, I think, for lack of a better term, they, did kill the people that came up front. But of course, Fauci still survives, not just survives, but is giving, speeches at Ivy League universities. I think he was at Princeton the other day, and so on. And the idiot students are cheering him, and so on. So it's an insidious situation, and I don't know. I mean, like, I would just love it. I mean, I dream, we all do, of the day when the great Republicans, come to power. We know better, but we dream of this. That there's a big sweep in November. The people have their way, and then there's going to be hearings, and Fauci's on the line, and so on. So, it's none of it's going to happen, but we like to pretend.
Yeah. Well, so
it's the only thing that gives me hope to keep me from revolting. So I have to believe in it a little bit.
That's interesting that you talk about that, because so the idea that someone could get to a certain level of power within this structure, I've also always seen they have to have skeletons in their closet. Like, the reason why Biden is the perfect president is because he's not in control, and the reason why you see that is because of everything that happened with Hunter, right?
Ring. Jeffrey Epstein on the other line.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like Hunter and some of those other scandals are the perfect bargaining chip to keep him under control, right? Like, he'll continue to parrot the lines that the vested interests want him to parrot, which means he's not the one in control. Like, he's not the one who's pulling the levers and choosing which direction things go in.
That's not to say he too is not evil, though.
Well, no.
But yeah.
I mean, like, he's evil to the core because he's available the highest bidder, right? Like,
well, that's the one silver lining of the Biden presidency is, like, for the first time, I think even your average voter, non-libertarian, sees the game for what it is. They're like, this guy isn't in charge. Like, there's no way this guy's in charge. I mean, it's unfortunate because we have all of these economic fallout that's coming from the lockdowns and the printing and all this insanity that we did for the past 2 years. And a lot of really uneducated people are just going to look at it and go, "Oh my God, look at what Biden's done to us." When the truth is that this chain of events was set in motion years ago, and we're going to pay a price. But the good news is that, even though they're not going to understand who's truly culpable for the economic turmoil that we're experiencing today, very starkly, at least they're starting to realize, like, okay, there is definitely a man behind the curtain, because there's no way this guy is the conductor of this train.
Matt and I have talked about it just in terms of Trump. Actually, neither of us is a Trump fan. But I said to him one day, I'm like, Trump's going to go down as one of the best presidents in history, because in his presidency, like, the media was shown for what it is. Like, I think so many people woke up. Not that he was good or anything, but just from what he did.
The history books won't be written that way.
No, but maybe not.
But he's like
the new history books will be written that way, though.
Yeah,
the Michael Malice's of the world.
Will. Yeah, the ones that are in code, right? No, but he's like the idiot that stumbled into pay dirt, right? Like, I would say that, like, the things that he did had absolutely nothing to do with policy. In fact, a lot of his policies were just awful. I mean, they were bad economics, they were bad practice, right? But it was really kind of like the messaging. It was the unsheathing, like, showing that the emperor had no clothes on. Like, those are going to be the successes of those 4 years, right?
To me, Trump was very close to understanding his target when he talked about draining the swamp, right? That's really and it's not a swamp, it's a lake. It's not a lake, it's an ocean. I mean, it's the state is the swamp. I mean, there's no distinction between those two things. Everything else is just marionettes. People that come and go. And so Trump figured this out. He's like, I don't know what's going on around here, but I have some sense that, like, I think I'm in charge. I'm how many times did he say that in the first couple of years? He's like, I'm president. Why isn't How come people are not doing what I say? Well,
Yeah.
guess what, Mr. President? You know, there's a state, and then there's a veneer. You're part of the veneer, my friend.
Yes.
You know?
Well, what's funny is like you talked about kind of like both of you talked about the hubris of people in that station, right? And thinking that they essentially can do whatever they want and it's benevolent or like it's going to be perfect or it's going to be amazing, right? I can just imagine Trump thinking the same way about, oh, it's a swamp. So what I'll do is I'll just have my cleaning crew come in, and they'll just come in and just vacuum up all the shit, and then it'll be a nice place. I'll put a skating rink there and like a mall and all kinds of other stuff. It was like, I mean, like I always get this word screwed up, like the euphemism or whatever holds true. It's like he had the ring of power. All he had to do was throw it into the lava, right? And he couldn't do it because he felt like his ego made him think he could wield it better than anyone else, and it ended up that.
There's also the fact that he didn't really understand Washington. So one of the first things that a president has to do, you get to hire 4,000 people. And they had all the administrative agencies, you know, several layers deep. And their political appointees, of course, the primitive bureaucracy of 2 to 5 million people, depending on how you count it, totally ignores these people. Nonetheless, you need to fill those positions so you can at least get some eyes and ears on the ground, what's going on in the administrative state. Trump looked at it like he only wanted to hire extreme Trump loyalists, so he insisted on looking through the list. So after 4 years, he had only filled like 20% of those positions. But of course, somebody's going to take those positions. So all that did was give the administrative state even more power. And for once, you know, the permanent bureaucracy was like, they were worried about who Trump was going to appoint because the appointees do have some influence day to day. They can make messes anyway. I mean, they hardly ever win, but they can, you know, sort of shake things up a little bit. But a lot of these agencies were waiting to find out who the new Trump appointee was, and that person never arrived. So they began to get ever more comfortable. So by January 2020, February, they realized, hey, we're on our own. We got this place to ourselves. We don't have to worry about this guy anymore. Yep. And so once Fauci, Birx, and Farrar and these people convinced Trump to lock down, and we don't have to, that's an interesting story in its own. I mean, that's a fascinating thing. Why did Trump do this? And that speaks to the arrogance and a lot of things. But at that moment when he acquiesced, suddenly the administrative state's 100% in charge. And everything that happened between March, I would say like 16th, and when Trump finally leaves office, January 1 or whatever it is, Trump is a pure decoration. Everybody ignored him, you know, for the entire lockdown period. I mean, he thought that first of all, he believed that he shut down the economy. Okay, whether he did or not, kind of did. I mean, he gave the green light in some sense, but he, in his own mind, believed that he turned it off and wanted to turn it on again. Guess what? There's no on switch, right? So about a month later, or maybe it was 6 weeks later, something like that, he said, "All right, everybody, let's just open up. We're gonna this virus is gonna be endemic."
That's exactly how he said it.
Yeah. All right, so all right, go back to school. Can you cut it out with the mask crap? I mean, you know, but everybody ignored him. I have a friend of mine who was hilariously working for NIH at the time, not being paid, by the way, but Trump kind of pushed him in there, and he was screaming. He was like the live wire and totally out of control and screaming at everybody all the time. And then went into the CDC and started messing with the MMWR. And it's like he was just making messes all over the place. And he called up Trump on the phone. He said, "Look, your bureaucrats are undermining you. Whatever. You have no idea what's going on out here. I mean, the NIH is off on its own. CDC is doing its own thing. They hate your guts. They're trying to destroy you. They're ruining your presidency. And they're lying every single day." And Trump says, "All right, great. Thank you for that information. Here's what we're going to do. You are going to be hired by the CDC. And I want you to have a top position. All right, let's make this happen. Goodbye. Hang up."
No follow through.
I'm guessing that didn't fix it.
So the guy walks in to, I don't know who was in charge, Redfield or somebody like that. Well, I just got off the phone with the president. He said that you need to hire me a very high position here. And he's like, yeah, listen, it's kind of getting late and they want to talk to me later. So they just blew him off.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks later, the guy calls up Trump and says, look, I don't know, like, as I told you, this bureaucracy is out of control. Did you or did you not say that CDC should hire me in a high level position? He said, yeah, I definitely gave that order. Well, they're ignoring it completely. Trump said, this is an outrage. I'll make a couple of calls and then suddenly Ivanka's, bothering him for something else, whatever. So he forgets about it. Anyway, they ignored Trump entirely on a really crucial personnel decision. And then 2 weeks after that, they came to this guy and said, listen, dude, you're not really working out here. You got to get out. So they kicked him. So Trump wanted him in a top position at CDC. The NIH and CDC fired the guy.
Yep.
Okay, so that's what we're dealing with here.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So Trump wasn't actually in charge. And if you think back at it and look at the roiling of the press between, say, April 15th and the election, it did seem like Trump is completely detached from the actual goings-on of the government itself.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's not accidental.
No, it's not. And I think, Matt said earlier that he wanted to, he just wanted to call up some cleaners basically and come and just clean up the swamp. Yeah. I think honestly, he would have benefited had he literally filled those couple thousand positions in his cabinets or whatever with actual garbage men, like actual garbage men that work in America. Like because he just needed some blue collar guys that would actually do what they say and listen.
Wouldn't that
to the
been fun? Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been amazing. It would have been like actually getting rid of this managerial class and just having like day laborers come in and do the job.
Right.
And I think it would demonstrate how unbelievably worthless these jobs are. Because if a garbage man can do it, then it's like
yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, go to Alexandria, Virginia, to any kind of barbecue restaurant and just give jobs to everybody there. Sorry about your restaurant. It's going to have to close. You all are going to be overpaid bureaucrats working for Department of Agriculture, Department of Labor, Department of Transportation.
You're now the head of NIH.
You're now the head of HUD, whatever. Yeah. Wouldn't that have been great? You're my new Undersecretary for Economic Affairs. Go.
I couldn't have been worse.
Yeah, I don't know what that does. No, don't worry about it. We have a tailor come in. He makes you look good. Don't worry. Just be able to smile.
Listen, trust me. The guy you're replacing didn't know what this job entailed either. Don't feel bad.
I'm glad we're having this discussion because we need to have these kind of discussions about like what do we do? What happens if there's a big revolt and all the good guys are put in charge and the bad guys are kicked out of public office? What do these new people do? How do they manage their how do they take on the real problem, which is the swamp, which is the administrative state? I mean, what are the steps that need to be taken? I'm not sure I have the answers. And here's the problem. The political class is almost always outsmarted by the administrative class. They've got 2 to 4 years, and they're mainly worried about their election. And that's what they're good at, getting elected and that kind of shit. But there's a number of issues. What do you do once you get the power if you want to take them on? The other thing is there an actual public consensus for what you should do? Like, is the public even aware of this problem about which we're speaking today?
I think here's the easiest solution. You Milton Wadhams them. All right. Milton Wadhams from Office Space, right?
Okay. Yeah.
He got fired like 2-3 years ago, but he keeps getting a paycheck, right? You just cut off the paychecks, right? Like that's all you do. We've gone through periods of time where there's been basically gridlock on the budget, right? And all unnecessary positions are basically frozen, right? And then they get back pay or whatever.
I agree with that. But
just have someone who comes in and instructs, appoint the Treasury Secretary, and then tell the Treasury Secretary, we're not paying shit. We're not paying anything, right?
Yeah.
Just let it all fucking go. And
so I agree with that.
That's the only way it's going to happen, because as soon as the money dries up, That's essentially what keeps most of those people there.
But the problem is there's no precedent for that, at least not in my lifetime. I mean,
Yeah.
we couldn't even get rid of the Department of Education back in the 1980s. I mean, we can't get rid of these agents. It's like that would be ideal. But cutting the budget, and by the way, forget about cuts. How about no more increases? Right? I mean, like,
well, but
We
Clint
need cuts.
will tell you, like, Clint and I got to do an economic episode because we got to talk about what's happening. I mean, shit, what happened today in the market and what's continuing to happen, right? Their hand might be forced. Like they might be stuck. I mean, like when you look at the course of the Federal Reserve and the fractional banking system over the past 100 years, they're between a rock and a hard place. Like they're literally fucked. Like there's not many tools left in the cupboard to keep this party going, right? And so then they have to make some really tough decisions. And so right now you got a guy in Jerome Powell who is essentially one of these pinup guys who does not have a brain of his own. And so what he's doing is he's faced with having to rip the Band-Aid off, and he just can't do it, right? Like he will continue to chase inflation, and you'll continue to have this BS in the press about transitory and peak inflation, and oh well, core is going down, and people are like, yeah, but I can't fill my car and I can't eat. So like, what is it? Well, what does the price of a TV matter, right? Like
that's the one beautiful thing about economics is that the propaganda can't make people have food.
Yeah,
you know, like it can't make you fill your gas tank. Like the people will feel it no matter how dense they are when it comes to why this problem has arisen. It doesn't matter because they still are suffering tremendously. And I honestly disagree a little bit that they don't want to rip the Band-Aid off. It's that there is no decision to be made. They will allow the people to suffer at the benefit or to the benefit of the established, ruling elite.
Oh yeah,
always. So like I understand your point though. You're saying that with the national debt, perhaps they can't increase interest rates because then they won't be able to afford their budget. I think they actually go the opposite route. They say we're going to monetize our debt and we're going to allow you to go bankrupt. I really think that's the avenue.
What they're going to say is you're just going to have to be used to higher levels of inflation. Like that's what they're basically going to fucking say.
Well, I think that's a problem though, because that inflation is a self-fulfilling cycle. Like if people start to expect that a month from now shit is going to be 10% more expensive, then you start to have buying sprees that makes inflation escalate because the supply can't possibly keep up with the demand, and people are trying to front run the price increases. So that's a very dangerous game. Like if they go that route where they allow inflation to run hot for an extended period of time, you could have actual runs on major, very vital markets, like we're seeing with what's it called? The baby formula.
Yeah.
There's also, we tried to buy a bag of cherries the other day and it was $22 or something.
For a bag of cherries.
We're like, fuck that. No, we're not getting that.
There are.
I know it's bad.
I actually had this conversation with someone the other day, where they were trying to pin this on someone, right? Like who gets the bag, right? Like whose fault is it? Putin? Is it Biden? Is it Trump? Is it Jerome Powell? Right? Like the answer is like it's a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah.
But what's
it's
interesting
everyone
about
other than the Democrat Party,
just people in power.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like it's essentially the ruling class. Like that's who's at fault because they essentially pilfered everything that they could pilfer, and now it's time to pay the check, right?
Yep.
And the interesting thing about inflation is kind of like truth serum in a way, right? When you can keep it controlled, you can kind of keep things under wraps and you can hide a lot of evils, right? Like we were talking about in terms of, people that know where the bodies are buried, right? When inflation starts to run unchecked, it shows where everything gets screwed up, right? So I responded to one of your posts the other day that one of the most profound things I heard about the oil run that's happening right now is a commodities trader who said that this is the revenge of the old economy, right? We forsook with the technocrats like Gates, the technocrats like whoever's advising Biden that we need to be all in on our electric vehicles and all this shit. They essentially shunned the old economy of oil and fossil fuels. And this is the revenge, right? Like
You
the
can call it the
revenge
old
is-
economy. I call it the real economy. But yes,
yeah, well,
continue.
yes, yeah. I mean, like the one that you're not trying to the fictitious one that you're not that you're moving toward, right? The
Right.
one that you actually have, right? What do you have today? And so inflation is like this amazing truth serum because it finds the cracks and explodes them, right? There's no fix, right? Like you can't fix runaway inflation with what's Biden tried? He tried to deplete the strategic oil petroleum reserve, right?
Yeah.
That screwed up, did absolutely nothing to prices, and then on top of that, he's buying it back at higher prices, right? Sanctions on Russia, right? He's tried sanctions on Russia and all kind of stuff. Ruble's never been higher. Russia never made more money. We're sticking it to Putin. That guy's making more money than we are at the moment, and they're actually able to ease because their central bank had some ammunition left in order to spur their economy. He's tried all of these kind of like workarounds in terms of the baby formula and the shortages and stuff. He's going to end up chasing his tail the entire time. But inflation it's like water. Like it finds the crack and exploits it. The question is whether or not we can inform people enough so that they don't succumb to the rhetoric. Because I mean, like you see it online. Everyone's like, oh, well, Biden's economy, I did this and everything like that. And you're like, no, it shouldn't be Biden's picture. It should be fucking Powell's, and it should be, Biden's and Trump's
Bernanke and
George W.
Greenspan.
and Obama. Right?
But if you so here it goes back to your question. Was coronavirus man-made? Was it sent out? Was it a bioweapon? I believe, and it depends on how conspiracy.
Or did it buy us 2 years?
Was this all part of the World Economic Forum? Are we going to digital currency? Are we going to everyone will rent everything and there will be no meat? And Bill Gates is absolutely involved in all of that.
I think it's the biggest question of our day is this a controlled implosion of the economy to shift us to central bank digital currency? And I wouldn't blame you for believing that. I mean, they talk about it pretty openly, so it's like, it's a distinct possibility. But at the same time,
there's always crazy people out there saying all sorts of crazy things. So the question is whether their views were actually connected to the actions that were taken. And I agree with you. I don't know the answer to that. It's super creepy. But like one of the things that strikes me about the inflation problem in particular. There was an article today in the Wall Street Journal. It's actually really interesting. It's like typically framed as why didn't the Fed anticipate this? Okay, but which it was a dumb way to pose the question. So why? I mean, they caused it. So but anyway, very interesting. Some quotes in there from former officials and blah blah blah. So in 2008, they saw the financial crisis coming along, and they massively expanded the money without real consequence. And one of the brilliant ways that Bernanke did this is that he was paying interest on the reserves to keep the money off the streets. So you buy the MBS products with newly printed money. You recapitalize the banks, but the banks hold all the fake new capital with the Federal Reserve because the Federal Reserve is paying higher interest than they could get on the markets. Okay, then that keeps the money cold. Keeps it in cold storage. So we didn't see response in terms of inflation. So that created a kind of intellectual arrogance. All right, here's a crisis. Let's print money. The thing they forgot was Bernanke's trick. Pay interest on the reserves, keep the money in cold storage. Instead, they dropped it like a helicopter into everybody's bank accounts, for over the course of 18 months and 3 successive waves of stimulus. And so you had COVID spending at $6 trillion. You had the Federal Reserve creating $6 trillion new dollars to buy the new debt that Congress was creating, and then dumped it directly into people's bank accounts. And then you're shocked that there's inflation. Okay, that is the epitome of intellectual arrogance. I think at some point the Fed believed that in modern monetary theory that they could just print forever and there would be no real consequence. So they were shocked.
Well, what they did was they took Bernanke's roadmap and they put it on steroids, right? So I was talking earlier today with someone about the reverse repo facility at the Fed, right? There's basically $2 trillion sitting in, what you said, cold storage, right? Earning essentially 0.5% risk-free. And so Could you imagine how bad the problem would be if that collateral didn't have to be on account at the Fed right now? Like,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you'd be talking about, and this is if you believe the BLS survey in terms of what the inflation rate is. Like, if they're saying it's 8.6, it's 14 or 15, something like that, right?
At least 12.
You know, yeah. And so from that standpoint, you know, that arrogance. Now, to speak to the intention, right? Like, so, like, is this, you know, I feel like I should channel Alex Jones, like, "It's the globalists, the black helicopters," right? Is this globalists or the World Economic Forum doing this, or is this some other thing? I tend to take the position that, like, with all of these things, whether it be COVID or
Maybe they're all
when
connected.
Katrina happened, 9/11, all these other things, that there's certain things that are put in place intentionally, and then all of the other dominoes that fall kind of happen organically, right? And it's organic based off of the interest of various groups that kind of like glom onto it, right? Like, and so from that standpoint, the last 2 years, I look at it as the ultimate pump and dump, right? Like, Wall Street wanted 2 years, like the last 2 years out of this bull market, because typically what they're given is the Fed typically telegraphs what they're going to do. And that gives the Wall Streeters the opportunity to lighten on the long position and in many cases flip and make money on the way down, right?
Sure.
They didn't have that opportunity. This COVID thing came up so quickly that they didn't have enough time to telegraph to Wall Street what was going to happen. And so what Powell probably felt like he had to do was essentially throw them a lifeline, artificially inflate the economy for 2 years. And here's the other thing, like, the economy that we have today is just as big, or if not smaller, than it was in 2019. It's just all the extra dollars that were printed that makes it look like it's bigger, right? And the wealth effect, the
I
psychological
would imagine the
wealth.
economy is actually smaller. Yeah.
Yeah. And so from that standpoint, it's the ultimate, like, you know, remember when, like, all the meme stocks were happening, like AMC and GameStop and all this other stuff, right? These guys that started the GameStop fad, they essentially started pump and dump schemes, all of them, right? And they did it in crypto, they did it in all these kind of like high risk speculative assets. And that's exactly what the Fed did over the last 2 years. They essentially gave Wall Street this out, the ability to make just a little bit more on this bull market, which was long in the tooth. And at the same time, they gave them a runway in order to essentially dump money or dump these holdings to idiot retail investors that were buying, you know, like freaking diamond hands and chicken tendies and all this other shit. Gave them 2 years to basically dump all of their holdings to those people. And then on top of that, get short on the market, knowing that eventually the Fed was going to actually have to become way more hawkish than they had been in the past.
But so you don't believe that this has to do with wanting more, like running into a digital currency, running into wanting more information on
I think if
everybody?
it gets there, I think the people that have a vested interest will push it in that direction. The question is whether or not it gains enough momentum to get there.
And if it gets rolled out, it'll be the banks that benefited from this past 2 year, you know, completely fictitious bull run.
Yes.
That implement it, because they are the real power brokers. They're the ones that select the politicians by funding their campaigns and things like that. Your question about whether or not this is some grand conspiracy, I view it a little bit more simply, in that I think that this is a natural product of a global technocracy. You know, whether or not they are all working in tandem is kind of irrelevant, because they all believe that they are smarter than everyone, and they all believe that they can do whatever they see fit. And
There's definitely a church that they all go to.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, if it's Church of Satan, if they do, but I believe that they, like, the whole reason that lockdowns became a concept that we could even consider is because of technocracy. The whole reason a vaccine mandate for the globe was even considered was because of technocracy. The whole reason that MMT is considered palatable or not insane is because of technocracy. These are people, they're just technocratic elites that think that the rules don't apply to them. And unfortunately for us, those rules do apply to them, and we're going to pay the price. The problem is, because they have the power, they will be able to insulate themselves from the collapse, whereas the common man will not. And
Is the main issue greed,
Well,
power,
it's
and
It's
greed.
centralization of
Cent-
control.
no, I just think it's really that they have, because they have been in this good old boys club where they all pat each other on the backside and they all think that they're all so powerful and so brilliant, and it's like it's their little community, you know. It's been like this for so long, and there hasn't been a real turnover where like these people just got wiped out because the entire mechanism by which a market clears has been obliterated through the Federal Reserve. That you now have a bunch of people that aren't as smart as they think they are, that have risen to incredible heights of wealth and power, that they now, and they all have each other's back because they all benefit and they all sink together or they all rise together. And it's just kind of like human nature at this point. Like because of the central bank, you have created this technocratic elite that is controlling the world in a way that is completely counter to economics and science and everything else. And I think it's all going to come crumbling down. I really do.
And you know, the Federal Reserve is part of this technocratic elite, and it's also like
absolutely
the CDC and the Federal Reserve occupy the same sort of positions within this. They're both outside of the realm of democracy. Neither are really controlled
Same with
by
the WHO. Yep.
Yeah, by politicians. You know, I mean,
exactly.
So they all occupy this strange upper tier that hates democracy. They're terrified of it, actually, and they do think they're smarter than everybody else. But they're also working very tightly with the large scale private sector actors, you know, and Twitter and Facebook and Google and so on. So and it's interesting because, you know, as a longtime libertarian, I tend to have a Manichaean view that the state is bad, the private sector is good. But here you have a real coming together of all these interest groups and a revolving door between the two, and they're all just supporting each other.
It's like actual fascism.
Yeah, it is. But think about how you just said that they really hate democracy, but then consider that someone like Facebook Zuckerberg was putting hundreds of millions of dollars into, you know, reinforcing our democracy or whatever. Like these people work in tandem to make sure that democracy only goes in the direction, which basically means that democracy doesn't exist. But but it's, again, like you were just saying, it's the private business actors that are working in tandem with the, you know, powerful politicians and these supranational organizations that are not really governmental in the Federal Reserve, the WHO, things like that. So it's
and
So
they
I
really
had to look up the definition of technocracy because I don't know these things.
yeah, go for
I'm
it.
an arts therapist and an artist. All right, so technocracy, and this is kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week: management of society by technical experts, and we were talking about screen addiction in kids last week.
Yeah.
Like, holy shit! It goes deep.
it goes very deep, right? Like
when you start to think, like when you talk about like a technocratic elite, right? And having the ability to like basically
essentially invade the home
with their fingers and their puppetry, and they're invading and they're over influencing over parents, kids through school, through iPads, through everything they watch, through placement of things, through everything. I mean, that's really fucking scary.
Yeah. Who was it earlier that said something about how Trump caused a panic among the ruling class because they thought, oh my God, the people, if this is the kind of people that, you know, the kind of person that the people are going to elect, we can't have it. I don't know if maybe that's you, Clint. I forget.
I think it was Matt, actually.
Matt, yeah.
They all had their pinkies out, and they were like, "Dear God, I can't believe they let this gentleman in." Like, you know.
Yeah, and if you read Machiavelli, that's where he gets his whole advice to the prince. You know, it's like if you let the people have a voice and have real influence on public life, you're probably going to get your throat slit. So let's figure out another way here. You know. And I think Trump did kind of inspire this panic. You know, Hillary Clinton called Trump voters, what did she call them? The
deplorables.
Deplorable. That was just the first sign. But now that is like doctrine among the ruling class. You know, there's very strange, mysterious, terrifying people. They live in red states. They vote in ways of which we don't approve. They probably have Twitter accounts, and they're hanging around,
They drink cheap beer and
yeah,
they have beards.
They call it flyover country, but they'd like to call it gulags if they could.
Yes.
So they're terrified. But here's, somebody mentioned earlier about the sort of clarifying nature of economics, and this is what I'm most excited about. I have friends of mine who have hated my guts for 2.5 years, ever since I've been on this COVID thing. They're calling me up going, this inflation stuff just really sucks. I really I'm not liking this. My 401k it's down. Do you have any thoughts on what I should do with my money? It's like, oh well, welcome to the real world, right? What about having climate change? Are you concerned about that? How about you just kind of look? What about the wind and the sun? I mean, those are your friends.
This is move over climate change. We want 401k change.
This is the truth serum that Matt was talking about. People like all of the propaganda and all of their preconceived notions kind of go to the wayside when you actually start to suffer financially. When your life changes, it's like it's all well and good when the stock market's booming and your 401k is doing great and you're just sitting there virtue signaling with your fucking Ukraine flag. But all of a sudden,
exactly what I was going to say. That's when you can stand with Ukraine.
Exactly.
We stand with Raytheon.
How would you like to have that $50-60 billion back to help with some gas prices right about now? I think most of those Ukraine flag people would like that.
Yeah. No, it's so. I want to be respectful of your time, so we're going on almost an hour and a half. But I think I have something that kind of like ties into the economic conversation, and it's something where reading this book really made me think back to like the Carnegies and the Rockefellers. Okay, and so the robber barons, as they were called, throughout most of their life, they were looked at as evil, right, in what they did. They were looked at as greedy capitalists, right? Rich people, especially in times of people when there was a large disparity in wealth, and they had a dramatic, just a wealth compared to the vast majority of people. And what happened was later on in their life, they kind of got to this point where all of a sudden they got into this kind of like philanthropist mode, right? Like where they took these in their cases, tens of millions or hundreds of millions, which in today's terms are billions and tens of billions. They took this money and began to try and give back, right? Like they try and create these centers of art and expression and all this other stuff, basically buildings to put their names on. And the one thing that I thought about was like Bill Gates, if he knows of that, right, and he sees how like the Carnegies and the Rockefellers are thought of nowadays, it's almost like a competition, because like I think he thinks, all right, well, like, I can't just do what they did, right? Like the fucking Bill and Melinda Gates library or whatever. Who cares? Like, it's just another building with my name on it. I really think that he's trying to create this like grand legacy, right? Where in the past he was looked at as this dirty monopolist, right? Like this guy that was sued by the U.S. government, that essentially had to take a stake in his competitor so that the U.S. government thought that he wasn't being monopolistic in his practices, or at least so it was sold to the people, right? But it almost seems like that this is his holy thing at the end of his life, where he's trying to make up for being a greedy capitalist, and he's going to like save all of the people, right?
Yeah.
Do you get that sense? Like,
shake that off.
I mean, like, do you get that sense from him?
It's hard to be a philanthropist.
It's just kind of another iteration in his,
well,
lunacy.
It's hard to be a philanthropist. It's very difficult. If you've got several $1 billion or tens of billions of dollars, and you want to give it for good causes these days, you're right. You can't just make more libraries or whatever. You end up you want to do something some grand project, and abolishing pathogens around the world is I guess
he literally says that we can stop flu. right? Like he
Oh,
literally says in the book that the COVID showed us that we could essentially get rid of the flu, which is completely wrong
like,
because again he discounts
when
viral competition within her.
When I hear that, I just hear him making billions more money on some new thing, and I don't hear it as
well. That's
You
the
are.
I know
question.
how you hear it. I know how you hear it. You hear it like we're going to, he's gonna heal mankind. It's gonna be his stamp on the world, his bookmark in the book, right?
I don't believe it. I think he's fucking it up. But like, I've just heard so many stories of absolute.
I mean, I think it's a distinct possibility that this is about legacy for him. I mean, that's another thing that I now have experience with because I've worked with so many well-heeled investors, and I've seen that that's what they do. They start to because these are lower level people, they will work towards getting a library at their alma mater named after their family trust or something like that. But for guys at this, the highest echelon will start to try and have a legacy that's insurmountable. And I think that Bill Gates, had he been capable of eliminating pathogens worldwide, would probably be that would be quite the legacy to have. Unfortunately, it's detached from reality, which is the same problem that we have when we talk about central bankers. It's detached from reality because you still have scarcity, you still have economic inputs that you cannot concoct, you cannot work around. They are real because it's real supply and demand, and it's real scarcity that you're dealing with. And these people, and I genuinely believe this, many of them have drank their own Kool-Aid to the point that they genuinely believe that they can remake the world in their image. Physics be damned, science be damned,
biology.
Biology be damned. They can do it. They really think that. And I think they're dead wrong, and we're going to pay a huge price because of it. But until they will actually own that fact, and I don't think they will own that fact. I think that's why there is no capacity for looking back on mistakes that they've made. Bill Gates, even when he talks today, he still even when he acknowledges that, we failed here and there, but had we just had more power, then we could have probably succeeded. And it's just, I think that's the nature of these people. They will never look in the mirror, and it'll just continue to get worse until they actually, the pitchforks come out.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just, living the average everyday life, but it's so hard for me to me, that's giving a pass to him. To me, that's he doesn't get a pass.
No, he's a lizard person.
There's no pass on offer from me, I promise you.
And he's watched them suffer, and he knows that he did that, and he knows that there's so much.
But you got to keep in mind. You got to keep in mind, even when children suffer because of his vaccination programs in Africa or wherever, he still believes he's working towards the greatest good. And communists, by their very nature, believe that you can sacrifice the individual for the collective. And he is all about the collective when he talks about these things.
And plus, from his point of view, he's like, all right, so I made a few mistakes, and my friends did too. What's your alternative? You want the people to rule?
He's like, they're just kids in Africa.
Good luck with that.
He makes that point. He makes that point, Jeffrey, about the guy who raised the alarm bell and came up with the original swine flu vaccine. And if you remember, 45 million people, and there's that, I forget if it was Dateline or another show, has that one segment about the 45 million adults that were vaccinated, and a bunch of people, right, a non-negligible amount of people end up becoming paralyzed because of this vaccination. And in the book, he legitimately rationalizes it as, well, it was worth it because it could have been
That's right.
way worse.
He does that. Yeah, he does say that. Yeah. So he doesn't think of people as people. He sees them, well, as I think Clint said
That's
this
an
earlier.
interesting
They're just non-playing characters in his game.
Yep.
So yes, the elites make mistakes. Yes, the vaccines are imperfect. Of course, they slightly miscalculated the case fatality ratio of SARS-CoV-2 and so on. So
Slightly.
But history is iterative, and even the smartest people, even the people who invented the operating system for Windows, they made mistakes, but you have to keep allowing the process to keep going. We have to keep experimenting and recognizing our failings. But what's the option? No operating systems?
Yeah.
What's your option? You want people to just like be free to do whatever kind of shit they want to? That's not going to work.
Well, that's like I've always felt
be
more
anarchy.
the Linux people, right? Like because the Microsoft people and the Steve Jobs Apple people are the centralizers, right? Like you have to have the one person who's the smartest guy in the room, and he makes all the calls, calls all the shots. Because if you didn't, then what would happen? Like, anarchy would you would run amok.
This is the funny thing about it, though. These people have enabled human flourishing in a way that's almost unimaginable, and the reason they did that is because they empowered the individual with their technology. And yet even they can't look at their legacy and say, I have accomplished so much because I have allowed the creative power of billions of people working independently to create masterpieces that we could have never imagined. That should be their legacy. They should be praised and appreciated for that.
But they don't. I don't even.
But they can't. They can't have.
They don't
that.
even understand that, and they've spent the better part of the last 2, 3, 5 years trying to dial it all back.
Yeah, they really have. Yeah,
trusted news initiative. Taking over all the social media companies with censors and. The fact-checking industry, they funded all this stuff. They're trying desperately
100%
to get rid of the vision that initially inspired the creation of the internet in the first place.
They were like, oh shit, we gave them too much. We gotta reel them back in, right?
Yeah. And it's working. That's the hell of it. I mean, I sent out a tweet earlier to my friend, one of these, I forget his name, something Rogers. He's kind of, I guess you would describe as an anti-vaxxer, but he had a really good critique of an article about the vaccinations of 5-year-olds, and it was really powerful. And I thought, well, I'm just going to tweet this thing out, just whatever, And so I did. And next thing you know, the thing had 500 likes 5,000 likes. It started going wild. And the author wrote me and said, hey, thanks so much for tweeting. We have disagreements on things. I said, well, not probably, we don't, but I'm maybe more careful than you. And then somebody wrote me, they said, listen, I just retweeted your tweet and I got a 24-hour ban.
That is crazy.
So now you think about this, right? This is how censorship happens, right? So suddenly I wrote her and I said, wait, you were just banned for 24 hours? She goes, yeah, just simply for retweeting your tweet. And then I began to feel guilty because it's like, if I'm tweeting things that people like and retweet and it gets them cut off from Twitter, that I feel a sense of culpability in a way. So what did I do? Don't judge me. I went to my account, and I'm a blue check mark, so I think I get a pass from these people. I don't know why. But I deleted the tweet because I didn't want anybody else to find themselves in that similar situation. I didn't think it was responsible for me to be putting out content out there that if people like or retweet, gets them banned from Twitter. So I believing I'm helping others, I deleted that actual tweet. This is how censorship takes place. And I participate.
The definition of chilled speech. I mean,
it's the chilling effect. It's like I embrace the Michael Malice school of thought. Let the hate flow through you. Like when those things happen, it's a learning. Like you should almost kind of like draw attention to the fact that you were able to send it out and someone else wasn't.
I agree
and that's
with
a
that.
perfect example of selective speech on a platform.
Totally. And this is how authoritarianism works, right? It's never terms of use, that sort of thing. They arbitrarily kill people. They just silence you, and you don't
send
know
a message.
when they're going to strike or why they're even striking. Like, why is it that my tweet survived, but if you retweeted my tweet, and by the way, it was just one person contacted me, and there were like 3,000 people who had done this. So I don't know why she was targeted. But that's all you need to do is just arbitrarily hit people.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's how authoritarian, and then you make people afraid, and then yeah, and next thing you know, this article which I found very interesting, and suddenly people are not finding out about it because I deleted my tweet. Okay, should I don't know. I don't know what the right thing to do is in this case. It's very
tough, man.
Yeah, it's a tough. This is the world in which we live, and I never wanted to live in this world. By the way, I think this is egregious.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm in the position of having grown a substantial following, but I'm not a blue check, so I have and my speech is absolutely chilled. Like I have, because I value this as a marketing tool. I have no choice but to moderate how I deliver my messaging.
But this is how they get you. This is how they get you. Yeah, this is how they control you. And this has been going on for 2.5 years at least. I have friends of mine who told me, who are big writers for the conservative media, that early in the pandemic, they were wanting to write articles against COVID. And in those days, the editors of the site said, well, the last time you did that, we got dinged by Facebook. We get dinged again. We're gonna get deplatformed, and there goes our model of distribution, and there goes your job.
Yep, and there goes our opposition party. So we no longer have one.
Well, and what's crazy is as many of these platforms have come up that are, quote unquote censorship resistant or whatever, even they have succumbed, right? Like Parler, DuckDuckGo pulled stuff out during the truckers rally. Like all of these different kind of like service providers have kind of fallen to certain things. That's why I'm actually a big proponent of Web 3.0. The blockchain social media revolution that's coming. I mean, like technically it's here, but it's beginning to grow. And what's interesting is it's growing in the most oppressed places. That's how you know how amazing it is, right? Like, so some of these South American countries that have no free speech, it's one of the, we're broadcasting on Vim.tv right now. That's on the Hive blockchain. They are truly decentralized. Like they're based out of Canada, but if Canada, the US, every westernized nation locked down on their servers, it would still be up because they have stuff in, Afghanistan and things like that are running, right?
But the distribution is nothing compared to the big platforms. You're talking about
that's the problem.
0.0001 versus the major players, and it's terrifying. And like I share your optimism, but the problem is that I think that this solution that you're advocating, and I agree with it, is probably 5 years away at minimum, in terms of reach. Meanwhile, the world is civilization is collapsing. I'm sorry to put it that way, but
this has been the libertarian dilemma for a while, right? Do you try and reform what is already there and maybe past the point of reform, or do you begin to build for civilization 2.0, right? And so we've actually found that, I can tell you anecdotally, that in terms of like, say, attracting people from the disaffected Republicans and disaffected Democrats that are being basically shorn off every single day because of these litmus tests and these purity tests that both sides have, right? The answer is you have to build the platform that they can easily translate to, because if they don't, then they're going to stay where it's comfortable, right? Like they're going to stay where I can't tell you how many black flag waving, if you took them out of the Republican Party, would be anarchists, right? Still running the Republican Party because they feel like the Republican Party is the only place where they have a shot to win.
Well, there would have to be a mass exodus.
Well, no,
I think in order
you can trim them slowly. I think what matters is you have to show them that there's a market. Like you were saying, Jeffrey, like the reach isn't comparable, right? But here's the other thing, though. There's reach and then there's depth, right? And so on a lot of these platforms, the depth of the viewership and the interaction is way deeper than the
Oh, yeah.
superficial nature of,
But
YouTube.
Well,
and
you're quite
stuff.
right
there
about
comes
that.
the point too that Jeffrey made of like, we're just in the shit right now.
Well, yeah.
Is there time to switch and move and do, I don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
Well,
I-
this is the exact same problem that we have with the social media platforms, is what you're describing with the duopoly, is that, if you want to reach the most people, you run as an R or a D. If you
Yeah.
want to reach the most people, you put your podcast on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And like, it's a huge problem. But the good thing, in my view, is that as the tyranny increases exponentially, so too do the alternatives, and so too does the adoption of those alternatives. So like, they are ultimately creating the new economy that we will eventually all migrate to.
Eventually.
So but to Jeffrey's point, the next 5 years are going to be hell.
Ooh, I have something
That's
on
my
that.
concern.
front yard gardens.
I
Go
don't
ahead.
know if y'all have ever heard of human
Raisement.
design, but human design says 2027.
This is kind of interesting. So
this has been in play for a long time, and like, we're basically, the point of human design is that we are midwifing right now into the birth of 2027. And so before 2027 has been all of this like global cities, centralization. And then 2027 is supposed to bring in more of like a
decentralized
local commune type communities as people switch over. But the problem is the years between now and 2027. So if you can just look forward, but there's a lot to it. So many people talk about this, and I know it's strange because it's like astrology / I Ching / Kabbalah / Tree of Life, all that kind of stuff. But I think there's something really to it, watching what's happened between like my lifetime. I was born in 77. So like my lifetime, what is happening and watching how it's moving, it totally makes sense to me. Like
I think the timing is going to sync up. I personally don't buy any of the superstitious stuff that leads to it, but I think that there is I don't mean to say that to be derogatory. I just like
it's fine.
It doesn't speak to me, but I still do believe that like there was a natural ebb and flow to society and civilization, that like once you get to a kind of an apex of tyranny, you devolve back into a more decentralized world, and I think that's going to be positive. So I'm looking forward to it. I think that my job, and Jeffrey maybe feels the same way, is to wake up the remnant and to try and guide them because we're going to need numbers. Like if we don't have any numbers, like if it were to happen today, I think we'd be in a lot of trouble. So like my goal is to try and bring in reinforcements, and that's what I'm focusing on until they shut me off entirely.
Yeah.
And just remember, it's just a birth.
Stop.
We're just midwifing. We're just pushing it through.
Well, the labor pains are about to kill me, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, it hasn't even started yet. We're just starting labor. But when you think about it, it's like all of, there's so we have, the pendulum has to swing in the other direction.
It's swinging, girl. Don't you worry.
My problem is that I'm stuck in a permanent state of mourning for what might have been and then what was destroyed. And I
struggle with that too.
I just don't know when I'm ever going to get out of this, because I'm just so angry and so furious, and I just can't believe the stupidity and evil that would have taken.
What's also crazy is the speed at which it happened, right?
I know.
You look at other civilizations like Rome and the Turks and the Ottomans, right? In many cases, the rise and the descent took thousands of years, right, or at least hundreds of years. With us, I mean, we're not even on 300 years yet, right?
I can spin this positively. The reason it's become so rapid is because of technology. But the reason that our rebuilding process will be so rapid is also because of that same technology.
Oh, that's true.
So that's true. I think that's a very hopeful note. God willing, I'm right. We'll see.
Well, not to go back to the whole human design thing, because I'm not going there in that way, but the part of between now and 2027 is more people will feel the need to speak their truth. And the more people that feel the need to speak their truth, the more people are okay with speaking their truth. And that's what actually brings in and births in the new 2027. I mean, it's like strange to talk about it like that, but that's what it is. It's people speaking and expressing how they feel.
Well, and that's
the
nature.
the
That's the
point of it.
nature. I should show you. I forget if I showed you that video of Ron Paul talking about the remnant, but
Oh yeah, you
that's
did.
that's the nature of speaking out, right? It's like finding the people that message actually resonates
Yeah.
with. But you have to be brave.
And
right,
then it's
to do
just
it.
that we're the first people, so it sucks.
We've got
But
a long,
as the
we've got a
years
long
move
way to
on,
go.
more and
Yeah.
more people jump on that wave of truth.
And
that-
courage is truly contagious. I have people that message me all the time saying, I quit my job because of your show. Like I was not going to take the jab. And guess what? I'm now working for an employer who treats me with respect, and I'm getting paid better, and blah blah blah. Or I started my own business, or I did this, or I did that. Like, and it's because they're inspired, So like, there's power in that, and I never.
I agree with that.
I never lose sight of how blessed I am to be in this position to try and inspire some people, because we need inspiration, because it's so dark out here otherwise.
And people are almost always, you can't guarantee it, but more often than not, and quite often in surprising ways, better off
they are
personally and professionally if they don't put up with the shit. I mean,
Totally
you see it going on around
spirit,
you.
right?
You shut it down, and you take a leap into the unknown. And sure enough, you emerge on the other side better off than you ever were.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. It takes this bravery and courage, and in every single individual, that sort of step that you have to take to take that risk to improve your life and to behave like a free person with dignity. You take that step, and you'll find quite often that you're better off than you ever were. And we need millions and billions of people to take those little steps every single day, and that's going to make a huge difference. I don't think we're anywhere close to that at this point, but
well, I think also there's a big difference between watching the average person speak their truth as opposed to reading Bill Gates' book.
Well,
I think there's like
the
like you can see it.
The one thing I was going to say was, I think this is a really important point to close on what we've been talking about, is that the average person is no less or more important than Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Or any one of these other people.
Or how they feel.
Right. And so from that standpoint, I think that people have to stop thinking in terms of those power structures and thinking that they are more or less important than that person, right? Their role might be different, right? Or their responsibilities might be different depending on what situation they're looking at. But from that standpoint, we've already shown that someone who is very wealthy and powerful can still be an idiot, right? Like,
that's how we started.
The sad thing about what you just said, Matt, is you said it with a sense of ominous, trepidation, like I'm going to say something really radical. And it is radical, and it shouldn't be radical. We've been saying this, since the 1610s, or I don't know, go back to the Magna Carta. I mean, maybe that's not the best example, but for at least since the Enlightenment, this was the conventional wisdom. And the fact that you say this on a podcast now, and with I'm sorry, I don't want to say anything too shocking, but everybody has equal dignity. I'm sorry, there's no one person more important than anybody else. That's the very essence of liberal philosophy that built the modernity that we all inhabited.
And not to be depressing, but going back, just saying that, not to be depressing, but going back to the whole fucking coronavirus thing and COVID and one life shouldn't mean more than another. Having lived through my parents dying in the hospital and the treatment they got, because of their age, because of their, whatever was going on, because they didn't want to pay their Social Security, whatever it ended up being, because they made $6,000 per remdesivir dose and per $24,000 per diagnosis. And like, they were not treated equally, and there was no fair fight. There was no fair fight.
They definitely weren't treated. So like we actually went through this, not to prolong the episode or anything like that, but we went through this kind of like mental, thought process, and the way that they were treated was not comparable to the average cancer patient.
No.
The average, there was a dehumanizing effect of some of these things. And a lot of these things that like Bill Gates talks about in this book are dehumanizing, because they end up, like you said, Jeffrey, talking about people as if they are just numbers or NPCs or essentially just one other test subject, right? Like in the process.
But we all deserve to be treated.
But that is an interesting kind of like yin and yang kind of thing, is like you're an individual that isn't necessarily more or less important than, say, a Bill Gates. But at the same time, it's an amazing thing to be an individual and to be in the place that you're in.
That's the most important message that we all have to deliver. It's the most foundational one. It's the one that we have to get right, or else nothing else we say matters. And if we want to look at a job that we have, I would say to reinforce that message and to drive it home is it. It puts everything else to shame. We have to get that message right, where everything else is at risk.
Yeah. I think that's a good.
I think that's
note to end on.
Right there.
Yeah. Let me give you a quick spot to plug. I always forget to do this at the beginning. But Jeffrey, Clint, I'll start with you, Jeffrey. Where can people find out more about you?
Brownstone Institute is my labor of love, is my project, and I'm really proud of it. So
it's a masterpiece.
Or thank you, and send it around. It's doing big things, and I hope it has a brilliant future. We shall see. But thank you.
Love it.
If the world has any hope, Brownstone Institute will be huge. I am at Liberty Lockpod on Twitter. Liberty Lockdown is the name of the podcast. If you want to check it out, you can go YouTube, iTunes, or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all over the place. And I would just say that one final note is that the benefit of our argumentation right now is that we have immediate evidence, 2 years worth, that valuing the collective over the individual, even if it sounds good, ultimately does not work, and it ultimately sacrifices both the individual and the collective. So we have really strong ground from which to argue, and I think that as sad as it is, we have to capitalize on that. So that's what I plan to do. Thank you guys for having me on. It was a great conversation.
No, look, you're not paid for this, so we fully appreciate you guys taking your time. I know that you're both very busy, so look, that's all I got. Any final notes?
No.
Good.
I think that was great.
No more final notes on human design or anything like that.
No, that was just my 2027 plug. Just be prepared, just hang in there.
We're gonna do a full episode on human design, so we'll talk some spirituality and stuff like that in the future. But
sounds good.
With that, this is the end of this episode of Ungovernable. We will see you next week, Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, live. Peace. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, friends.